the Faster Than Light radio show.
Hi and welcome once again to the show. Thanks for joining us. Ahead of you in the next half hour, there is some very exciting material indeed. Interviews with two people I recorded in the last week. The first of them follows in about 5 seconds, but towards the end of the program, an interview with Jenny Blackford, who was in Perth for 5 days, teaching a course in West Perth for IBM, whom she works for. More about her and Ebony Books, which she and her husband have put together in the eastern states, later in the program. Also news and reviews of what's happening around Perth, but to lead into the news section, a short interview with a man whom you know of but probably have never heard unless you've bought a book from his bookstore. I'm talking about John Hall Freeman, who is the owner-manager of Space Merchants, the sponsor of this program and other things on this station. And John Hall Freeman I caught up with during the week, nattering to him about some of the exciting events that are happening at Space Merchants, and here's what he had to tell me.
Well, what we've decided to do, because of the cramped conditions, we've decided to be able to swing a mouse. We're going to take over the shop next door, and we hope to have it all up and running by around June, July this year. And everything's growing. We're going to get far more books, comics, and all the related merchandise, which we have been stocking and selling very successfully in the past 6 months. We've had fantastic support, as you're aware, in Perth. The fans here seem to be a lot different from elsewhere because we're so isolated. We seem to all sort of work together. In fact, the shop itself has amazed me as an owner because the ability for everybody who's a customer to come in and take over and run the shop themselves, which I've never seen in any other bookshop anywhere in the world. It's quite often where if a shipment comes in, you'll have half a dozen people, and they're pricing things, putting things away, checking invoices. And you never see this sort of thing. You'd never see this in a major bookseller anywhere else in the world. It's unique. And I think we've got a very unique little shop. I wanted to expand so that we can actually have more stuff to sell. But my feelings are we've still got to keep it fairly small to be able to have the ambience and the centre of what it is, so that
bookselling can keep on going here in Western Australia.
Yeah, right.
John, a couple of things interest me about the shop. One has been the sort of reception that it's been given by the local fan community. As you expressed, it's been sort of out of this world. Sort of working in books and bookshops myself over the last decade, I agree with your analysis that it's been not as I would have expected. The fans here have sort of taken to having a bookshop of their own like ducks take to water, and a lot of other people as well, people that listen to this radio show that have walked in off the street that have been science fiction and fantasy readers for a long time, have found here somewhere where they can find a haven almost from the lack of material that is elsewhere. But having more floor space and being able to offer more things is great. But what has it sort of been your reaction to 6 months of bookselling in terms of being a bookseller? Because it's a novel occupation for you, I believe.
That's right. After having been in the electronics industry for 20 years, I've also been in the book trade, but that was many years ago in the UK. I find that there's no hard sell involved, which is fantastic. That the product sells itself, and that the demand to obtain things that they can't get out anywhere else is it's amazing.
Talking of not being able to get things anywhere else, you've been quite successfully bringing in material not available in the UK rights area from the US by air, and I believe this last week another ginormous shipment of boxes arrived.
That's right. We've got currently in the shop we've got a huge amount of material from the US, which is all out of rights, which is available on sale at the moment, including a very wide cross-section of science fiction, not just the more popular end, the Piers Anthonys and all the rest of it, but a lot of the more out-of-the-way books have come in as well, which are of great interest.
I've said it before, and I'll probably keep saying it until we all grow old and grey, that Space Merchants really is a place to find the material that you can't find anywhere else, and in fact it's beginning to get to the place where you can't find it elsewhere in Australia, which is a good place to be in for West Australian book buyers and readers.
Yeah, well, we've had various managers of various over eastern states shops in recently who've commented that we've had maybe 20 to 30% titles in a lot of the more popular science fiction bookshops over east, which is very gratifying for us because we were under the impression that we were nowhere, but we're actually out now to be #1 shop in Australia, and then from there the world and the universe is our oyster.
Paperback
Well, from one who sells paperbacks to what is available out there in the bookstands at the moment. In fact, I've been speaking over the last, it seems, 4 or 5 weeks, mainly about films, and I'm going to comment on BFC's film program in just a few moments. But I thought this week I might comment a bit more on the magazines that are available, as there is a good amount of material coming in continually through Gordon and Gotchin, making its way to the newsstands, and also you can find it in bookstores as well. I continually look at Starlog, and I suppose a number of you do as well. Currently the films most talked about are Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, Tanya Roberts' new voyage into the jungle, as she's been there before, and she's looking lovely as a blonde jungle queen, Sheena. The story, by the sound of it, is going to read very much like the comic material from which it comes, but nonetheless it's something that'll brighten our screens through the winter, I should imagine, on the large screens. There's also a lot of other material available in the last 3 or 4 Starlogs about the large summer release movies, Star Trek 3, Gremlins, Temple of Doom, Ghostbusters, and others. A couple of movies we haven't seen, Buckaroo Banzai. I don't know if it's going to be released in Western Australia. It hasn't done particularly well elsewhere in Australia. And also Brother from Another Planet. Now this looks to be particularly interesting as it's set in a black alien, or an alien who looks like a Negro, comes to Earth and really settles himself into Harlem. It may seem a little low-key, but it was quite well received in the US, and it's one movie I hope one of the distributors here in Western Australia picks up and runs on our screens. There's of course other material around, and a lot of comment on the special effects used in the summer movies and others. You can find that in Starlog and sister magazines such as, well, sister in terms of subject content, not so much in publishers, magazines such as Starburst coming out of the UK. In the comic field, one which I haven't commented on for a few weeks, there is some wonderful material at the moment. I picked up a comic called Time Spirits from Space Merchants. It's the first issue of a new comic series for Epic Comics. I picked it up because someone whose mind I particularly respect when it comes to comics said that this was a better story than most and beautifully drawn. It certainly is that indeed. It's Epic Comics is the adult comics on what we would call archival paper, not on your normal newsprint, being produced by Marvel Comics. It's got a little bit more blood and gore, and I would imagine nudity in other series, certainly not in this particular comic. This story is quite beautiful, a mixture between American Indian backwoods Western comics, the spiritual nature of the American Indian himself, and alienness. Alienness in terms of artefacts, alienness in terms of magic and their own religion, and the whole lot put together makes quite a powerful story. It commences in Time Spirits, and you can buy that, as I say, around the newsagents and bookstores such as Space Merchants at the moment. Also available this time through your mailbox, courtesy of Time Life Books, is a series called The Enchanted World. If you're a buyer of newspapers such as the National Times or maybe even the Weekend Australian, you may well have got a pamphlet describing the series over the last 2 or 3 months. It would seem that Time Life Books is starting to blanket Australia with information about this series. Of course, if you get any other of their material, you will have already seen about it. The Enchanted World is a means to discuss the mythology that's become quite prevalent in fantasy novels, especially in the Western world, and to give it a sort of an embodiment with very good illustrations indeed. Time Life has a lot of money at their disposal, and so these books are beautifully presented. There are books on magical lands, books on elves, books on dragons, books on all the things that one normally expects to find in fantasy material. There's even a book on the unicorn. The illustrations are modern illustrations and done by some beautiful people. For those of you who know your science fiction illustrators, I know that Alicia Austin had a lot of material put into this particular series for Time Life Books. I wasn't expecting them to be so quickly available here in Australia, but as I say, in January, Time Life started distributing information on them to the Australian readership. The books, I would imagine, will cost you around about the $16 to $17 mark. In fact, I see here from the pamphlet they're $23 plus $3 for postage and packaging. So that's $26 all up for each volume in the series. And there would appear to be somewhere around about 6 to 8 at the moment. Although if I know Time Life, if it becomes successful, there will be more. Some other things that came my way. These very much courtesy of Space Merchants. Space Merchants have brought in from England the very good magazine Interzone. This is the modern fiction magazine that takes off where New Worlds left off in the early 1970s. It's got some very good fiction in it. The latest issue number 10, which is available just recently through Space Merchants, has fiction in it from, amongst others, Gene Wolfe, Scott Bradfield and Rachel Pollack. But earlier contributors have been such people as J.G. Ballard, Philip Dick even, M.J. Harrison and Cherry Wilder. Interzone has done a polling of its readership on what they thought were the best stories in the first 8 issues. And interestingly enough, one Jeff Ryman, The Unconquered Country, comes up as by far and advance the best story anyone had read, followed not so closely by Richard Cowper's The Tithonian Factor, and finally by Scott Bradfield's, or coming in at third, Scott Bradfield and Keith Roberts with 2 stories, The Unmistakably the Finest and Kite Cadet. Those stories, I would imagine, will be collected in a recently announced Interzone anthology. I had conversation during the week with the Dent Publishing Corporation in the eastern states, and Dent are putting out, evidently in April, an anthology called Interzone, and I said to the lady, it's probably material selected from the very good British magazine at the moment, and she was surprised because it wasn't information she had at her disposal. But that is the case. Interzone have sold the anthology rights to the stories on, and Dent are bringing out that anthology, as I say, here in Australia in April of this year. Look out for that. It'll be new short fiction from the British school rather than the American school. A little more downbeat, a little more depressing possibly, but certainly well-written and good material coming out of Interzone. Other information in this latest issue of Interzone is the fact that a very good friend of mine, a previous West Australian, has joined the editorial collective as an assistant editor of Interzone. That is Judith Hanna, and there may be a number of listeners who remember Judith. She's married to an Englishman at the moment, and therefore I would imagine resident in the UK for quite a while, and yet she is working on what seems to be the most of British projects at the moment, Interzone. Good on you, Judith. I hope to catch up with you at WorldCon, maybe get a few information down on tape to pass on to the Faster Than Light radio show listeners about what Interzone is and what it's getting up to. Also available through Space Merchants is a new magazine, to me anyway, called Fantasy Advertiser. It concerns itself with what comics are available in the UK, interviews various people involved in that world, but more than that, it has a column in it which tells you all about what science fiction and fantasy is being released in the UK. And because we in Australia follow quite closely that market, if albeit some 2 months later, this is very much a reflection of what is coming here for us in Australia. Well, what is just down the track in terms of paperback material? Granada, it would seem only a month away, going to release a new edition of Orbitsville. Previously it's been a pan paperback. Bob Shaw, of course, is the author, and with that they are re-releasing 2 recent books of Bob Shaw's which Granada have published, A Better Man Trap and The Series Solution, Better Man Trap being a collection of the more recent Shaw stories. That, as I say, is soon to be released here in Western Australia. I noticed that A Canticle for Leibowitz is announced here as a December release in the UK. It's come out again in a large format through Corgi Books, and I believe it's to be released this month here in Western Australia. There is other material, of course. It seems to be that there's a lot of Doctor Who material coming out. There's more Conan material coming, more Star Trek material being republished by Bantam Books, and Lord of the Darkness being republished by Corgi for Robert Silverberg. Good material, and good material just around the corner. Of course, I will keep you up to date with that as it becomes available. Another good friend of mine lent me some material over the weekend to read my way through. Sally Beasley, thank you for your copy of File 770. And I noticed that File 770 is the most gossipy of the American news zines. The particular issue that I got off Sally has the Hugo Awards, or the Hugo Awards, which I would imagine are a sort of pistache, a sort of farce on the Hugo Awards. They're giving all manner of very strange awards away. My favourite of all that they were giving away was the Star Trek 3 award, Give It an Appropriate Subtitle subtitle, and they came up with "You Klingon Sons, You Killed My Bastard." You really have to see the movie and be a Trekkie fan to understand why that is very funny indeed. File 770. I'm going to subscribe so that I can hand you on some of the gems that I think are regularly appearing in this magazine, this fanzine, which has also been regularly on the Hugo ballot paper over the last 4 or 5 years. Well, I'm starting to dry up and you're probably starting to get tired, so let's have some mind-boggling music. This will lead into a short discussion of what remains of the BFC Film Festival. Here is Tomita. Scouring the galaxies to bring science fiction and fantasy to Perth is our sponsor, Space Merchants. New release and out-of-print books, film and TV tie-ins, magazines, comics and related merchandise await the adventurous at 1 Forest Street in Subiaco. 6 UVS FM thanks our sponsor, Space Merchants.
This here is Ridley Walker doing a station eye deed for 6 UVS FM, which it ain't really a eye deed, it's more like a ear deed because you're listening to it, which this is the Faster Than Light radio show. All best and trouble not.
Thank you, Russell. Well, fancy trying to come in over the top of good old Russell. This weekend at BFC, in fact, this Thursday night, let's start, because you've only got Thursday, Friday and Saturday, if you haven't been to any of the BFC Film Festival, to pull your fingers out and support a very worthwhile endeavour and see some good movies in the process. Thursday, Friday and Saturday in Hollis Lecture Theatre 2, there are some excellent movies. Could I commend to you Liquid Sky, which is on Thursday at 5:45, and it's being repeated at Saturday at 5:45. The double on Friday night and Saturday night is 1984, An American Werewolf in London, and on Thursday night at 7:45 and on Saturday at 1 o'clock you can see The Never-Ending Story and Dark Star. The Never-Ending Story, if you haven't seen it, is great. Teamed with Dark Star, that's good money. In Hollis Lecture Theatre 1, 2 programs I'd wish to pick out for you. Friday night and Saturday night's program is a double of Bakshi material, The Good Animator, Fritz the Cat and Coonskin, which I don't think has been shown here before. They're really his R-rated cartoon flicks about the Robert Crumb character, Fritz the Cat. They made very good movies. They made him some good money at the beginning of the 70s and allowed him to go on and do some of his other material. Catch up with that material. It's at Hollis Lecture Theatres 1 and 2 this weekend. And as I say, it's the end of the film festival, so go and see how good some of the material has been and sort of castigate yourself for not getting there earlier if you haven't already been along. Hollis Lecture Theatre 1 and 2 out at the Waite campus this weekend. It's your last weekend to catch the end of the 5th Fantasy and Science Fiction Film Festival. Well, I said at the beginning of the program, I also recorded an interview this week with Jenny Blackford. Jenny is half of a press called Ebony Books, which has had one publication to date, another one due, and in fact, as I found out during the course of this conversation, there is a third expected as well. But why should I tell you the story? Why don't we let Jenny speak for herself? Jenny Blackford, at the beginning of an interview, after I had welcomed her, I asked her what Ebony Books was all about.
Basically, it got started about a year ago. Oh, it's a year and a half ago now, I think. When most of the people we were hanging around with either wrote science fiction or published science fiction. And we figured that if they could do it, we could do it. We'd always sort of been planning on, one day maybe we'll publish science fiction. It had been a long-term thing. But one Nova Mob night, I don't know if you've heard about Nova Mob over here in Perth, but it's a situation where lots of science fiction heavies get together and argue with one another at great length. Anyway, one Nova Mob night, Damien said that he would let us publish Transmitters if we put it out immediately. And I said, oh, all right. And that's where Ebony Books came from.
Was there a problem with Transmitters? Was it simply that Damien thought, why not let some friends go broke and penniless and maybe lose them because no one else is willing to touch it? Or was it a project that he had got to completion and he thought, well, this would be nice if some friends did, in fact, become part of the project with me?
It was a bit of both, really. He didn't want to send it to his American agent because it's really much more an Australian book. And I had a nasty experience with the first people he sent it to, who sent it back obviously having only read the first 50 pages after 3 months. And when he got it back with that first 50 pages after 3 months, he didn't feel like going the rounds, though I'd really assumed that he would have had it snapped up fairly soon after that. I'd say it was a fairly bizarre thing. Seeing that we said we would do it now rather than with the normal 2-year delay that you get in most big publishers, he took up the offer.
Has it been successful for you? And if it has, what sort of success, how do you use the word when you say that?
Ooh, there's a tricky question. It has been successful in that we have published a book that we believe is a very good book, and it has achieved considerable critical success, more in fact in the general literary community than in the science fiction community. It's not going to be a major financial success. We're hoping to make money on it in the long run, but there's very little money to be made publishing novels anywhere. I mean, one believes that Penguin and so forth are only managing to publish any fiction on the grounds of their cookbooks and gardening books. But I think it's successful, yeah.
Is there truth in the rumour that the press is called Ebony Press because you immediately assume that most things you publish are going to win Ditmars, and the Ditmar always has to be some black object?
That would be a very nice rumour, but that hadn't actually occurred to us. What we wanted to call the publishing company, and what over the 10 years or so we'd been vaguely kicking around with one another, was Lurid Paperbacks. We thought it would be really nice to be able to come out with a press release. The latest Lurid Paperback is. However, we decided that wouldn't go down too well with the Literature Board, and we thought we'd be fairly dependent upon them. So we spent 2 weekends full-time throwing names at one another. Now, we'd already committed to Damien that we'd publish it, so we needed a name. So we spent our whole time trying to think of a reasonable name for a publishing company, something we could live with for a few years. And Blackford, we've got a black cat called Bruce, Ebony. No.
Sure. Why not? Tell me about the production of the paperback itself. Was that a reasonably straightforward operation for you, publishing your first book? Artwork for the cover, although it's got a photograph on it, quite a unique photograph in terms of Australian paperbacks, and publishing the book itself. Was all of that a new operation, or ones that you already had access to?
It was completely new to us, though it wasn't as difficult as I'd thought it might be. Now, I work for a very large computer company whose name starts with an I, and I tend to deal with a fair number of different situations there. And I found really that getting quotes for the typesetting and printing and so forth was really much easier than anything I did in my day-to-day work. So it's a complex process. You've got to get it typeset by somebody who turned out to be Bruce Gillespie, pasted up by somebody who was also Bruce Gillespie, take it to a printer, get a cover done, get it proofread, of course, then check the blues that they give you back from the printing, and get contact with a distributor. I mean, there's quite a few complex steps. But if I hadn't been trying to do a job that takes me 10 hours a day at the same time, I would have found it relatively easy, I think.
Right. Ebony Press is going to continue, though.
Ebony Books, actually.
Ebony Books.
Ebony
Why do I
Books.
think it's Ebony Press? Maybe I always, being a librarian, associate book publishing with presses. Press has got that sort of very large feel about it. Okay, Ebony Books. Ebony Books is going to continue. You've got another production in the pipeline, which I believe involves a West Australian. Can you tell us a bit about that?
That's right. And Australia had quite a lot of success with DreamWorks, which it published about 2 years ago now, which was edited by West Australian David King. David, in fact, had one of Russell's stories in there, and they entered into a fairly intense correspondence as a result. Now, when DreamWorks came out, David and Russell had been throwing around the idea of putting together another anthology, and Ebony have agreed to actually publish that anthology, and as a result we've been working fairly heavily on getting that somewhere towards completion. It's going to be launched at the Worldcon, which, as almost anybody listening to this program knows, is going to be held in Melbourne this August. And it's very similar to DreamWorks. It's a bunch of quite literary but also interesting stories by only Australian writers, all contemporary, all original to the anthology. Its particular emphasis is on life in the city, hence the name Urban Fantasies, because we feel that there is rather a preponderance of Australian literature involving Ayers Rock, Aborigines, wombats, kangaroos, whereas practically all of us do live in cities. I mean, if you're listening to this from a country area, just ignore this and think about Damien Broderick's Dreaming Dragons for a start.
I was going to say Damien obviously doesn't have a story in the anthology if it's not got Ayers Rock or wombats or wallabies in it.
Oh, Transmitters is set in Brunswick. There is nowhere quite so suburban as Brunswick.
Indeed there isn't. We'll have to leave Jenny there. Thanks, Jenny, for the conversation. If you have not caught up with Transmitters, it is available around town and you can get it readily at Space Merchants. Urban Fantasies, the new book Jenny's talking about, will be available come August. And the other book that we got onto talking about is the academic track of the Worldcon. The lectures that are going to be presented are also going to be published by Ebony Books. Good effort, a good publishing company, and something worthy of your attention. And you will enjoy Transmitters if you hunt out a copy, I assure you. That's all for this week. Next week, a look at BFC by the people at Ranit to see how successful it was, and also a look at some of the new science fiction and fantasy on the newsstands. By the way, I've still got some copies of Gremlins if anyone would like a paperback, courtesy of the Faster Than Light radio show. Catch you same time, same place next week. Bye for now.
Big wonderful galaxy.
You've been listening to the Faster Than Light radio show, produced and recorded in the audio studios of Murdoch University for 6UVS FM.